Good afternoon. My name is Joe Colangelo. I am the president of Consumers Research. We are the nation's oldest consumer organization, founded in 1929 to serve the American consumer. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. I think with the exception of myself, they have saved the best for last today. So we have a very distinguished panel representing quite a diverse set of viewpoints. Let's start with Bobby Lee. Bobby Lee, many of you know, runs BTC China. And he might be one of the Bitcoin maximalists in the room. And BTC China, I was looking into it yesterday, saying I'm going to introduce it as the longest running exchange in China. But I believe, and you can confirm this, Bobby, that with the closure of Mt. Gox, you are the longest running Bitcoin exchange. Is that correct?
It's a dubious honor, yes.
Okay, well, congratulations. Yeah, so who's the next one? Who's waiting for you to get knocked off? I'm just kidding. Bobby Lee, in addition to running a Bitcoin exchange, you probably understand what that does. He's introduced a number of different products throughout the years. You've seen physical mint products that have Bitcoin stored in them. But you've also seen some other things like Bit Priority, things to improve the Bitcoin process for users that are really revolutionary. And I think that when we look back at it, we'll see that they were the predecessors to a number of different side chains and other sort of blockchain innovations. But he's been operating in the Wild West of Bitcoin in a country that is constantly banning and unbanning the currency. So kudos to him.
That would be China, yes.
Yeah, it's China, exactly. Meeta Yadav is the Chief Data Officer for Blockchain Technologies at IBM. So she leads business data analysis to steer their blockchain initiatives. She's also an adjunct professor, this is incredibly impressive, in electrical engineering, teaching computer chip design at NC State University. And she's also worked at IBM as the CTO for innovation in middleware. Just incredibly impressive. Yorke, Rhodes, in between the two of them. Yorke is a consummate technologist. He's been working for a number of different companies, Microsoft, IBM, Goldman Sachs, a number of different startups, everything in the last 20 years at the intersection of whether it's operating systems. When they were first getting going, he was first working on them at Microsoft. When whether wireless, e-commerce, all of these different innovations, Yorke has always occupied a special place at a special company. So his perspective is incredibly valuable. If you have a chance to grab Yorke afterwards, he's got some war stories. What was that time they released a song for $2 million for the night or something? $4 million when Microsoft launched, was it 95, Windows 95? Anyway.
That team's not around anymore.
That team's not around anymore. You pay $4 million for a song, you only get to play it once. Joseph Lubin. Joseph Lubin is in addition to being the co-founder of Ethereum, he served as a robotics researcher at Princeton, worked on cryptography at Goldman Sachs, and in January 2014 launched Consensys, which works with Microsoft as well as a number of different other companies to provide blockchain solutions that we are all talking about today. And for the last couple of years, people have been talking about in theory, in principle, but never in practice. So if you're looking for the future of blockchain technology, you can look at this panel, you can look at what they've been doing for the last year. It might be their history, but I think it's kind of all of our future. So really excited to get going. I'm going to start with the easiest question. What's your vision for the future of blockchain? What's your company's vision for the future of blockchain, and how are you making that happen?
You want me to go first? Okay. So at IBM, we're building a blockchain for business. We've heard this word today. We really believe that this technology has the potential to not only reinvent existing businesses, but imagine new ones as well. We are investing across the stack. So we believe that doing things in the open is the right way to foster innovation. So we are part of the Hyperledger project run by the Linux Foundation. We have our cloud services on top of that, where you can spin up a blockchain network in a matter of minutes. And now you get a 4-peer, 1CA blockchain network to play around with. And on top of that, we are working with a lot of customers to build out different things that they need. So for example, we've been working with the Japan Stock Exchange. We are working with Everledger to trace high-value assets like diamonds, figure out if it was a blood diamond or not. blockchain technology is in its nascent phases. We've been really at it for the past year and a half, but looking at the data as a chief data officer, I have more data and more client requests than we can keep up with. We see tremendous potential. We are using it internally as well in a shadow chain concept where we are looking to save our global financing, $100 million that are tied up in disputes to be resolved in 10 days instead of 40 days that it usually takes. I think in the near future, we will see some low-hanging, real-life productions built out on blockchains, such as compliance. But I think we're off to an absolute brilliant start. And it's just one technology. I think that's going to revolutionize whatever we know about how businesses interact.
I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, I think it's a technology, right? And it does have an opportunity to revolutionize different businesses, even outside of financial services, as we saw in the prior panel. So at Microsoft, we have a similar approach where we look at the technology internally. We work with partners very closely. We're participating in the open source community in a big way and doing projects in the open as well. And then we also look at it sort of, how do we invest internally to look at it to get value from blockchain for the business? It's a great example in treasury example that Meeta was using. And then we also look at it from a technology foundation play perspective. How can we improve products at Microsoft to take advantage of the technology? And that goes from things like billing systems to what you consider consumer or professional technology like Office or Visio or LinkedIn that you can sort of define value propositions for. I think as I look at where we've been for the past couple of years, where we are today, and where we'll be next year. I was drawing pictures earlier, and basically I had 3 stacks, and then 3 stacks, and then 3 stacks. So basically, there will continue to be choice, and as a platform provider, Microsoft likes to provide choice. So we have probably 40 different partners that we're working with today on our cloud. We work with some in more depth than others, like with Joseph from Consensys, who's doing a phenomenal job. We see particular areas of interest. Bill was talking about identity earlier, as well as Brad, and that's actually a pretty interesting area. I think that if you listen to the conversations over the last couple of months, identity is one of those pieces of plumbing that we'll see, I think, as being very important going forward, and I know IBM's doing some work there as well. So it's a pretty exciting space. I know Geraldine earlier was talking about resources. I think technology engineers are actually quite expensive right now in general in the United States. I think there's a shortage of 200,000 to 300,000 computer science engineers across the industry. In blockchain, obviously, a specialty, that's even higher. So the value proposition in terms of like employment or consulting is very high per dollar or per hour per dollar. But I think what's important is this today, as Geraldine said, is not a technology problem. The technology, to some extent, is given or will be given. As I said, there are multiple platforms and multiple stacks. I almost look at it like databases, right? There was a time when people only believed in relational databases, right? And it was called Oracle or SQL Server or DB2. And then all of a sudden we got social media, and social media didn't really work well with relational databases. So companies came up with new technology solutions to solve for that. Now we have Mongo and Hadoop and Kafka and all different types of databases. So blockchain is similar, right? We have technologies today that, though I wouldn't necessarily call it a database, just because it doesn't have necessarily the qualities of a database, it's certainly a sequenced shared ledger. And that technology will be around for a long time to come in various different forms. I think the key challenge that we have now and into the next couple of years is, what is the business value proposition associated with the technology? And if we can define that, and that's a business analyst role, that's not necessarily an engineer's role, but if we can define that, you need people who understand enough about the technology, but even more so, as Geraldine said, about the business problems. And if you can sort of meld those two together, you can uncover hundreds of different use cases within your enterprise.
Thank you, sir.
So let me tell you about what I think and what we think as a company. BTCC nominally stands for Blockchain Technologies and Cryptocurrencies. So we straddle the two sides of blockchain technologies and also for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. The thing I have in mind is the first and most important use case for Bitcoin, the killer app, is really, we think, is the cryptocurrency aspect, meaning the digital value, digital asset. For the first time, as I said earlier today, for the first time in humanity, we now have a new digital asset class, a new asset class that's digital, that's different from gold. So gold was a previous asset class that was decentralized and no one can control. And now we have it for the digital age. And I truly believe the digital age is not only with us, it's here to stay. Meaning in 20 years, the internet will be even more pervasive, and everything from IoT to just VR, just our lives will be literally plugged into the internet. And in that sort of future, digital assets is a must-have and not a nice-to-have. So today, I think in this audience, most of you don't own any digital assets. If you think you have your email address, or email accounts, or anything sort of accounts and digital, it's not really yours. Because at a moment's notice, those ISPs and email providers can take them away from you. So the true digital asset is not even a domain name, but true digital asset would be something like Bitcoin or Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies. So we think that's the future. So our company vision is to provide the world with the most compelling, most convenient, and trustworthy digital currency services. And we think one day, literally everyone will use Bitcoin and other digital currencies. So that's on the digital currency side. Now, on the blockchain side, what we've done, besides innovating in the mining pool and block priorities and other sort of blockchain stuff, one important thing is, if any of you have electrical engineering or degrees in background, you know the CPU, the central processing unit of a computer. In there, for the CPU to function, there's something very important called the clock cycle. It's a timing signal that allows the gates in the chip to react and so on. So the internet, until Bitcoin blockchain came around, the internet really didn't have a clock cycle. So what I'm trying to say is the next innovation will be, for the first time now, blockchain now provides a whole world via the internet, a clock cycle, a timing signal. Now everything in the world that happens can have a uniquely identifiable timestamp. So whether it's financial reporting, whether it's auditing firms, auditing results of public companies, or whether it's companies making claims in the intellectual property space saying, I invented this or I patented this on a certain date. Now with a Bitcoin, with a blockchain, and with the fact that you can do the hash of your content and put it in the blockchain, you can have irrefutable proof that something happened at a certain point in time. So that's one innovation I see coming in the coming years. Thank you.
So the World Wide Web was invented in 1990 and got significant consumer traction in the late 90s. On the consumer side of blockchain, we anticipate that there'll probably be a compressed timeline, but something similar to that. Essentially, for the next few years, public blockchain and decentralized applications on public blockchains will see a lot of steady releases of different products and steady increases in utilization. We're probably at the very flat part of an S curve, essentially exponential curve plateauing. We at Consensys are building in excess of 20 projects for the public blockchain. Those things range from wallets to identity to reputation to token issuance and management and decentralized token exchanges. Built a governance tool and a crowdfunding platform and a lending platform and a music content registration platform and a prediction market and a poker platform. So we are working hard to bring consumers into the space. Yet I think it's going to be 5 or so years before there's real traction on the consumer side. What we are seeing, however, Consensys does product, it does some infrastructure work for Ethereum, and we do enterprise consulting. things are really growing quickly on the enterprise consulting side. So where consumers are wading into it fairly slowly, businesses are seeing real efficiencies, real use cases that they've been exploring in proofs of concept over the last year or so, and are starting now to build actual pilots and production systems. So for the next few years, I think enterprises will take up any slack if there is slack. Notwithstanding what Yorke said about blockchain being a database or not, it certainly holds data and has things like smart contracts or stored procedures. It may not be ACID compliant, but blockchain, in my opinion, is a next generation database-like system. And because everybody, whether it's on a public Ethereum blockchain or a private permission blockchain, because every actor on that blockchain has their own local copy of the data and their own local copy of the business logic that affects the data, they can be certain that no minority actor can improperly manipulate that data or the business rules. And so that's a pretty significant breakthrough in computer science. It's essentially trustworthy computing. So if you combine trustworthy computing with the fact that these things exist in a peer-to-peer context, then you have a mechanism or a force that will drive disintermediation. So I would argue that there are levels of intermediaries in many different industries, and intermediation is a very good thing when it reduces friction, reduces costs, adds information to a transaction, but intermediaries tend to impose themselves into a transaction, and at that point they increase friction so as to increase the spread between how much they extract from that transaction and how much they add to the transaction. So I would argue that for many, many industries, this massively open free market peer-to-peer trustworthy mechanism will be the most effective price discovery mechanism for the value of intermediation.
Thank you very much. You all have your own specific blockchain. You use it and it has certain attributes. Why do you use it? What advantages does your blockchain have over a regular database or over the Bitcoin blockchain? Or in your case, Bobby, over some other blockchain. So why use yours rather than just a large house database on AWS or Bitcoin? And please keep your answers to less than 1 minute.
All right, I'll go first. How many of you know where your shirt was made? How many of you can, very few. How many of you can say with certainty that the diamond ring you bought was not a blood diamond? Another question I got asked recently, how many of you know that the chip in your electronics that you have does not have a gold that was touched by a terrorist organization? We don't. For the first time in history, we have a technology that can help us understand that, help us understand where our food is coming from, and help us make the right choices, right? Central databases were very good at storing information. There was one central authority that had admin access to it and would hand out that admin access. The one thing that it did not do for us is it did not bring truth, trust, and transparency to the data. So blockchain technology is a distributed ledger. I'm sure you guys have heard it 10,000 times. What it means is every participant has their own copy. That also means the way that data is stored is nobody can come and steal $81 million like was stolen off the SWIFT network and not leave a trace, right? The transactions are chained together in different blocks, right? So you can't just go and tamper with a transaction. You leave a trace if you do that. So now we have a technology that's not just immutable, but also distributed and tamper resistant, right? When these definitions come around, it really says, okay, databases did not do this for us, but here's a technology that can do this for us and help us reimagine how we really interact with life.
Excellent, thank you.
Great answer. Yeah, and I would agree with that. I don't know if it answered Joe's question wholly, because it was two very complex questions. But the nature of the technology, unlike databases, is a non-organizationally owned technology that actually drives a lot of the value proposition associated with it. So being able to register products into this global registry allows us to verifiably secure lots and lots of different types of business processes. Hence the diamond example, or other examples like e-notarization and things like are happening in Delaware. So there's a lot of different ways that that can happen. And to answer Joe's question about a blockchain technology, today I would say most of the innovation in blockchain is happening in the open source community. So as a foundation, Microsoft Azure's cloud has been focused on making sure that we enable those technologies to be successful. And importantly for our business, which is very much of an enterprise-focused business aside from consumer products, to make sure that those technologies can be deployed successfully in enterprise. So we look very closely at how do we secure and connect blockchain stacks into enterprise legacy systems or middleware systems. Microsoft has a lot of those assets itself, like Active Directory and analytics tools like Power BI and machine learning. Those are important tools that our enterprise customers are using, and they want to use those in context with blockchain. So our role sort of in this to date has really been to ensure that that happens in a scalable and a secure way.
Okay, so for me, I guess I'll talk about the Bitcoin blockchain. And there's a lot of good use cases for private blockchains and so on. But for the Bitcoin blockchain, just to remind the audience, what's the big deal about that? Besides it's being the first and the original, beside it having the Bitcoin as a token and having the most value, I think what we have to remember closely is that Bitcoin blockchain is decentralized, it's immutable, and it's permissionless. So the permissionless aspect is not often talked about. What that means is anyone, including all of you and all of us, can go participate and be a contributor to the consensus ledger, the Satoshi consensus of the Nakamoto consensus of the Bitcoin blockchain. Meaning that we don't need to get authorization from the Federal Reserve or from any sort of committee or consortium to allow us to participate on there. And in doing so, there are a lot of participants. And by having a lot of participants, we can guarantee the fairness and the transparency and the immutability. So recently what happened was, I'll share a real personal anecdote. Recently we saw the Bitfinex, a well-known Bitcoin exchange, got robbed of a lot of Bitcoins. And moments later, the executives of that company asked the mining pool consortium, or not consortium, the mining pool operators, hey, would you guys mind getting together and let's reverse that transaction so that the hackers can't run away with the Bitcoins. So that was actually proposed. And for me and for many of us colleagues in the industry, we're like flat out, sorry, no can do, because we're not going to bail you out. I mean, it's too bad it happened. If it happened to BTCC, I'd probably raise my hand, want the same, but I wouldn't expect anyone to bail us out either. So regardless of what you think of whether this theft was good or wrong, good or bad, right or wrong, the reality is when Bitcoins move on the Bitcoin blockchain, when they move from one account to another account, that's it, it's done. No one in the world can and no one in the world will be willing to help reverse that transaction. That's the finality of the transaction. That's really amazing. Because until this happened, until Bitcoin was invented, this was never the case. Right? Anything from bank transfers to large country loans and stuff like that, all of that was subject to political, decision making in terms of what's allowed, what's not allowed. There's always someone making a judgment, and when you have someone making judgment, you can always fall on the wrong side of that. So anyway, so this is why I'm really, really in favor of. I think Bitcoin blockchain is very, very important.
So, just to add to that, I'll take 30 seconds.
Joseph's getting a different question. His turn. Sorry, go ahead, Meeta.
Okay. So no, just to add to what Bobby was saying, blockchain was a technological gift that's helping us reimagine so many things we can do, and it came from the Bitcoin community. So we can't lose sight of that fact. But Bobby's talking about a permissionless network. We are seeing several use cases of a permissioned blockchain and a blockchain for business, and that's what we are working on. And you'd asked that question, it was tied in your question, why your blockchain? And the reason we built our blockchain is we wanted pluggable consensus. we don't have the notion of proof of stake or proof of work in our technology, so you can process transactions really fast. We also needed the notion of being able to write smart contracts or chain code. So because of that, we built a blockchain for business, but inspired by the blockchain that was a gift from Bitcoin.
Joseph, so Bobby talked about.
Sorry, I don't own Bitcoin, so
We
I'm
want
I'm not the creator either. You don't have to thank me.
So Joseph, Bobby talked about, well, it's really valuable to know that this transaction won't get undone. Are there certain areas or recent examples where you would say maybe it's
By the way, I would
the
add.
opposite would be true, or
was-
like an example that you would defend where undoing blocks to restore lost funds is actually better than not undoing blocks to
I
restore
would
lost
actually, Joe,
funds?
before you answer, I was actually going to add to everything that Bobby said, to date.
What's to date?
To date. It has not been undone to date.
Right.
Right, because it's all based on consensus, right?
Sure, I mean, we're alive to date. I mean,
It's all based on consensus.
Could happen, it's very unlikely. I think we did cover in excruciating detail, both today and last night, situations where, sorry?
I missed the fun last night.
Yeah, you did. We did cover situations where there may be an overriding of algorithmic consensus by broad, multi-type stakeholder or social consensus. And that happened recently on the Ethereum blockchain.
Tell me about that.
We did cover this for an hour earlier today.
What is
This is
the
a perfect
DAO?
segue into my next question. Yorke, so you see Ethereum, they went through a fork recently. How does a company like Microsoft look at a protocol like this and react? This is certainly something new. You're not dealing with a company, you're dealing with a protocol. So you have to assess every single stakeholder in that protocol. How do you go about assessing?
Well, that was kind of my point about these networks or these systems are consensus driven, right? So if consensus can be reached, then something can happen, right? And that something could be a hard fork, it could be a soft fork, it could be anything, right? So to some extent, you can only look at history, to your point, at what's been done in the past, and the fact that the question was raised to BTCC of would you protect this organization? That's an example of a question that is social consensus, right? So sometimes social consensus happens and sometimes it doesn't. I think at the foundational level, if we sort of, not to use an improper term here, but roll back to the technology is interesting because it's a sequence of events over time, and creates a sort of a verifiable ledger of history is what makes it really interesting, and that's why it's interesting and why it's new, right? And why we haven't seen this type of technology deployments and interest within enterprises before, certainly from organization or parts of the organization, like the CEO or the COO in the organization. It's because it has the opportunity to change the way business processes have been done in the past.
And so just to make a prediction for pretty much everybody on the panel, in the past, companies, when they join consortiums, there have always been these sort of, well, we have to deal with people in a social construct, and we understand that there are different actors and we have to have a level of trust, but it's always been governed by law, right? And that law has always been geographically constrained, right? So you're dealing with other people in New York City, different banks, that they are all susceptible and vulnerable to the SEC and other regulatory bodies. Now you're dealing with these social kind of consensus building mechanisms that are completely outside of the law, so to speak, right? If there's enough momentum behind a group or an idea to do something, and that's in China and another country, or somewhere completely outside of U.S. jurisdiction, how are companies going to, in the next year, I think specifically, trust these protocols that they see are not necessarily?
I would say the closest thing to that is open source software development. Okay. Right? Open source software development is essentially consensus driven, right? Where you decide what is the product based on what you accept in the GitHub requests. And that's working, right? And that is not something that requires law to be involved.
So, and that's why we believe in open governance. But I have a question for Joseph. Was that one-person decision to hard fork Ethereum, or was it all the curators voted, or was it just the curators that voted?
It was a long, intense debate that raged over a number of weeks, and essentially 80+% of miners, all the exchanges basically, developers, the general community, and the Ethereum Foundation all basically voted that this was the best path to take.
I'd like to open it up for questions after one more. Bobby, what's the price going to be next year, this time? 2017?
I think you're talking about for Bitcoin, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Did we miss?
Here's what I know. I think as long as the governments of the world, the central banks, keep printing more and more fiat money, and as long as we measure Bitcoin price in that ever-inflating fiat money, when Bitcoin itself is only 21 million forever, then I think my logic tells me that price, quote unquote, will keep going up. So the United States or China or the euro, if they stop printing and limit the currencies to what it is today, then Bitcoin price should not go up. It's kind of like this measuring stick. Like, how much do I weigh now? How much will I weigh next year? Well, I don't know. I might gain some weight, I might lose some weight. But if the pound or the kilogram shrinks, of course I'm going to weigh more next year. Right? I'm only 5 feet 6 inches. I've been 5 feet 6 inches for the last 41 years because the feet and the inch didn't change. But if it's shrinking compared to the centimeter and the meter, guess what? I'll be 7 feet tall. So, hey, if I'm a betting man, yeah, you can finish the sentence.
Yeah, it's that old saying, when Bitcoin's $1 million, the exchange won't matter because you won't use the dollar anymore.
Yeah.
Questions from the audience?
It actually brings up a really good point, which is money. Go ahead.
No,
step up. Money is an abstract, right?
Yeah, money. Think about this. We have SI units, standard SI units. For temperature, for length, right? For distance, for weight, for volume, right? We have it all. But for money, we don't. Why? Because the keepers of money don't want there to be a limit. They just want to keep printing it. I mean, I would too if I had the printing press.
I'm wondering if the academics and maybe Microsoft, has some thoughts about this. Is anyone doing any kind of scenario planning into this new model for transaction activity, where there's a need for a consensus, but we could see the rise of gangs on the blockchain, a new way of dealing with the new model. So who's looking into the future about how this could go bad? What are the unintended consequences? Are any of the academics, is IBM looking into this? Is Princeton looking into this? Is Consensys looking into this?
So IBM is looking at it in a sense, if a transaction goes bad, what happens? How do we deal with that? We use practical Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus mechanism, and for that to cheat in that system, 1/3 of people have to agree to cheat. And we've said, okay, that's an interesting problem to solve, but it's on our list somewhere, right? If you're asking a question that's more academic approach on social consensus, I am not sure if people are looking at that. We internally discuss it with a lot of interest, because whenever you have a consensus mechanism and you have nodes that are voting, you have to ask yourself this question: what happens if somebody goes rogue, right? Can I tolerate 1, 2, 3 people going rogue? We say that as long as it's less than 1/3, we are good to go.
But what if the 2/3 goes rogue?
Yeah, it's.
Then maybe you're the 1/3 that's rogue.
Yeah.
So who's rogue in Ethereum or Ethereum Classic?
So
That's right.
Bitcoin.
There are positive uses for many technologies, and most of those technologies have negative uses as well. There has been lots of speculation in the cryptocurrency space that due to the nature of pseudonymous payments and unstoppable, uncensorable code. There may be some bad actors that do some disturbing things. Crypto lockers are enabled somewhat by Bitcoin. Makes it easy to get paid to lock up somebody's digital resources. There have been lots of speculations about things that could be built on a platform like Ethereum. There are things like assassination markets that could potentially be difficult to stop. We are likely to see some sort of social solution emerging. I believe the imagination can take that technology into a lot of different directions, and there is currently a lot of incredibly positive activity on the World Wide Web, and there's also a dark web. So I expect the same thing for blockchain.
I would say from an academic perspective, most of the research going on right now, whether it's Cornell, Princeton, or Carnegie Mellon, MIT, is sort of at the protocol level, whether it's protocols or consensus or things like that. But there's certainly an opportunity to do some game theory around what are the ways that you can sort of foresee different things that could happen in the future. And I think also there's a big difference between the public blockchain markets like Bitcoin and private implementations, which also drive towards different thought processes around things like consensus.
Charles Hoskinson, first Ethereum CEO, moved to ETC right now, to Ethereum Classic. What do you think he's going to bring the Ethereum Classic to?
I don't know. So Charles has been running an outfit called IOHK, and he has lots of excellent technologists. They've been exploring their own blockchain architecture. It's not clear that he's really going to jump wholeheartedly into Ethereum Classic. There's a lot of history with him and the people at the Ethereum Foundation, and partially it's opportunistic, I think, on his part, but he could potentially take that fork in a very interesting direction. I think it doesn't make a lot of sense for two virtually identical Ethereum chains to exist, but if the Classic chain experiments with different mechanisms, then I think that would be very valuable. I don't know what his detailed plans are at this point.
Never a dull day in cryptocurrency. Oh, sorry, Kyle.
How do you foresee the Bitcoin block size debate playing out? Will we still be at 1 megabyte block sizes a year from now, say?
For Bitcoin block size, I think what's important is not the actual block size, but the throughput. I think with segregated witness and additional technologies coming online in the next 6-12 months, we'll see more and more throughput. And the developers are hard at work at that. Eventually, there may be a soft hard fork to actually increase that block size. One thing to keep in mind is it's been a raging debate in the Bitcoin community for the last 18 months. And there is no solution that will satisfy everyone, meaning that even if you double it, increase it 4 times, 8 times, there will be certain people out there who will say it's not enough, it's not enough. And the danger there is if you make it too big, then you lose the decentralization potential of Bitcoin. So that's why there's been a lot of pushback on directly increasing the block size. Now there's the layer 0 stuff, which is the segregated witness and all that, and then there'll be layer 2, layer 3 solutions where there's Lightning or other liquid payment channels. So I'm optimistic about the future development for the capacity for Bitcoin.
I would just add a word in defense of intransigence. The small project here is do we increase or keep the block size the same? But the much bigger issue at stake is are we able to change the protocol readily? And this has shown, I think, to the entire world, that you can't even do something as what a lot of people would say is common sense, or has increased the block size to 1.1 megabytes. I bet they're never going to change it to 42 million bitcoins. So that adds a layer of security to people who think, this is an asset that down the road is not going to be, doubled in volume or something like that.
Yeah, people have asked me what's going to happen when all 21 bitcoins are issued. Isn't that going to spell the end of Bitcoin? And I say no, because even on day one, day zero, people knew 21 was the upper limit. And it turns out Bitcoin, the smallest unit, is not 1 Bitcoin, but rather it's 1 millionth or 1/100 millionth of Bitcoin. So even with 21 million, it's actually 21 trillion bits of each is 100 Satoshis. So there's plenty to go around. And even by then, let's say 100 years later, it's not enough to go around. There could be layer 2, layer 3 solutions that can further split the Satoshi into small usable units that could be off the blockchain. So, I mean, there's tons of capacity.
And I also think that these types of discussions and questions around technical things like block size are very similar to arguments with packet size on TCP/IP. Like, what's optimal? What size is optimal, right?
Or IP addresses.
Or IP addresses, going from IP4 to IPv6, right? I mean, those are all just they're technology implementation questions. I think the more interesting things are looking at, how do you evolve the technology with additional types of protocols.
So 2 years ago, coming to conferences like this, it was all Bitcoin. A year ago, coming to conferences like this, it was what's the killer app, and this year we're talking blockchain. I'd like to go back to last year's focus on the killer app or the killer use case, or what is going to achieve a critical mass and get people using this technology on a much grander scale than we're seeing so far.
I used to be irritated when I heard that question. But in our work at Consensys, I think we've come to the conclusion that blockchain-based identity will be the killer application. We and we're partnered with Microsoft and Blockstack. Sorry?
I asked for that reason.
We've partnered with our friends at Microsoft and Blockstack Laboratories in delivering a global blockchain-based identity system. So it's essentially self-sovereign identity. If you have access to the internet, you can establish your own identity construct. So that's a boon to 2.4 billion people on the planet who don't have identity from some sort of identity provider. We have married the identity construct with a multifaceted, multi-tiered reputation system. Basically, identity is a container for reputational attributes and reputational attestations. Attributes are things about you that you control. You can load your Facebook, picture of yourself, state-issued ID, and that can represent you to some degree. You can take your state-issued ID and go into an identity provider like a bank and ask them to sign a reputational attestation indicating that they deem it to be a valid identity document. Reputational attestations are things that other entities own and are essentially feedback on your conduct in different kinds of transactions. So if you're lending or borrowed money and pay it back, you are selling stuff and delivering it well on our blockchain-based market. You do well in the prediction market. You work in a team using our boardroom solution, and your colleagues deem you to be an excellent software developer. You play games. You're a great gamer. All of these things are essentially facets of identity, and we are attempting to basically mirror what identity and reputation is in the real world and make it persistently portable on the blockchain. So I can go into a bank and plop down some documents and get a loan. But again, 2.4 billion people around the world can't do that. And so they can use reputational attestations from people that they know, their community basically, bootstrap a bit of a blockchain-based reputation, maybe participate in a microfinance, micro-lending market, and essentially bootstrap their enfranchisement in the global economy.
Is profiling gonna go against the privacy laws in the United States?
So all of the data is user-owned and encrypted and granularly decryptable by targets that you make it decryptable for.
I want to just add to that answer. I think the killer use case is actually, this is a physical Bitcoin. Essentially, it's an account number. It has a private key for the account number on the blockchain. That's all it is. The killer use case of this is actually money, meaning global money. In this audience, we have people from probably over 20 countries, and all of us combined have interacted with probably 30 or 40 different currencies in the world. But today, currencies and money is still very hard and very illiquid, meaning it's hard to convert from US dollars to euros to Japanese yen, Hong Kong dollars, and so on. But Bitcoin, I think, it fulfills the promise as the first global money. This thing here is instantly valuable in all the countries in the world, in all the currencies. It has a live real-time price 24/7, irrespective of market hours and so on and so forth. So this is the promise. In my mind, Bitcoin as a global money is a killer case.
We don't see it as a killer app because everybody in this room has this assumption that we have access to money, that we have access to banks, that we have access to all these other things.
Yeah, it's not the case.
So
white collars, blue collars do, but a lot of no collars people, they don't have access to bank accounts or even money.
Yeah,
It's a really tough world out there.
So I agree with that point, but I also think in my game theory, and I'll ask a couple questions so I can put this in context. And granted, we're in a developed country, but how many people have an identity in this room? Could I see a show of hands? Everyone should have an identity in this room, right? It's either a physical or a digital identity of some form, right? How many people, for example, have a LinkedIn account? Can I just see a show of hands? Right, so LinkedIn is a form of identity, right? It happens to be user-attested identity with no validation, right? So if you move to a digital identity that you can now attest and validate, then you actually increase the value of that digital identity. So if you think about, and this is how it kind of started working with Joseph on identity and as well as the Blockstack guys, is like if you go down to the basic market framework, and this is easier to do in a third world country than it is in a developed country, and you look at how do people interact, right? They have physical interactions where they identify themselves through context, right? I'm taking my corn to market every week. I work with a co-op, the co-op knows who I am, but there's no actual record, there's no digital record of that, right? So if you can take that physical identity and relationship between those people into a digital record that is attested, and it actually creates a history and a reputation for those people and is verifiable, then you start to create this interesting value proposition that starts to address economic vitality around the world by addressing some of the worst problems. Now, if you take it all the way up to the developed countries, we do this with KYC and AML today in a banking context. So hopefully we can actually move that technology forward and do some smarter things there instead of every single banking institution recreating the exact same processes, and actually get some additional value out of that. But I think, so from my perspective, identity is certainly a value proposition. And by the way, the work that we're doing on identity with Consensys and Blockstack is open source. So the first implementation of that will be out very shortly. There are some top-level APIs that Microsoft is providing, which will allow anyone to build on top of those APIs if you're building applications and not have to worry about the underlying implementations. The reason we're working with Blockstack and Consensys is because we can demonstrate from day one Bitcoin plus Ethereum, so it's blockchain agnostic from an identity perspective.
So I think the ability to give identity to 1/5 of the world that doesn't have identity solves a human crisis problem in my mind. You asked for one thing, and identity is, of course, a very powerful one, but we are seeing disruption across the board, whether it be Internet of Things or tracking high-value assets. I think transparency in your supply chain, knowing that the farmer who grows my food has been rightly rewarded is important to a lot of people. So I think Internet of Things, supply chain, financial industries included, I think we're going to see most industries that involve multiple parties to participate are going to be disrupted, for sure.
Prue Ashby from London and Partners, and thrilled to be partnering today on this event. In terms of the future, do you see that the blockchain can be used in terms of solving problems that require intellectual property or knowledge sharing to actually solve a big problem. So can the tokens, for example, not be physical, but be something where a bunch of people from all over the world are actually working together to solve cure for some kind of cancer or something like that? Do you see it as at a knowledge level rather than a physical level?
I can answer it with respect to artistic content. And it may be applicable to ideas, but we're building a platform called Ujo. We're initially targeting the music industry, and we're enabling artists to register content, whether it be composition or recording, and then attach usage policies to that content. And so basically in real time, somebody can come along and buy a license. Could be public performance, could be synchronization, or any other derivative works. So instant licensing, instant payment to the artist, instant splitting amongst the artist's collaborators. And so that foundational intellectual property layer basically supports a social business network above it, and we're building that stuff. So I believe that one could apply this to ideas at some point and try to figure out ways of attaching usage policies to that sort of intellectual property.
Anything that you can sort of create a construct around, whether it's legal clauses in a legal contract, you can actually essentially register those. So you can imagine a new market for legal documents, which is actually get signed at the legal clause level with potentially smart contracts that say I can't have clause X unless I have clause Y in a document, and also allow you to, for example, anybody who's done lengthy contract negotiations, the favorite trick on the fourth day of a 5-day negotiation is to go back and open up something you've already agreed to. If you could actually start to codify that through signatures as you go through those clauses, then it becomes a lot harder for people to sort of use those negotiation tactics. So just as an example.
We're seeing a lot of startups in the space of digital rights management who want to work with us on solutions like that. So we're definitely seeing a lot of movement in this space.
Please give this panel and yourselves a round of applause for coming today. It was terrific to hear all your perspectives. Thank you so much.